Specifically, there's the handout that is a quiz. I know, you don't want to be back in school today, but this quiz will sort of prime you for this presentation. I give you about 5 minutes to take it, but really it'll take you less than 2 minutes to finish it. So why don't you go ahead and do that. Welcome to my presentation about cybersecurity. We'll get started in about another minute. Please take a minute to download or take a look at the handouts I've given you. The first one is a little quiz that will prime you or get you ready for this presentation, make you start thinking about some of the issues that we'll be discussing here today. Give about another minute before we get started. Jokingly refer to it as cyber Ebola because, excuse me, remember about a year or so ago, there was that terrible epidemic in Africa of Ebola, and there was a short period of time when the rest of the world was worried that this might spread to us and spread around the world. And, well, you know, for your business, cybercrime should be just as scary because cyber attacks, as I'll talk about later, are so expensive to fix and move past that it can cripple a business. It can kill a business. And you want to make sure your business has continuity, has life after a cyber attack. So that's what we're talking about today. And I'll give you some important piece of information at the end that you can use tomorrow, today, later this afternoon. To improve your business and the future of your business. Very briefly about me, I am a lawyer. I used to be a criminal prosecutor. Specifically, I handled white-collar crime. These are the crimes committed by very smart people. People who know how to steal large amounts of money using financial fraud. In that context, I did 53 jury trials over the course of 10 years. Now I'm in private practice, and I represent my clients primarily in litigation. Litigation, as you may know, is the process in court by which disputes are resolved. And my cases all involve fraud, financial crimes, and cybersecurity. Again, my cases involve very smart people doing bad things. The key area of expertise that I've developed over the years is communicating very complex factual scenarios in a way that allows people to make decisions. So those decision makers might be a jury in a criminal case or a civil litigation. Those decision makers might be the executive officers in a corporation who need to know what steps to take to move their company forward after they've been attacked by fraud or cybercrime. Okay, in today's presentation, there's three broad subjects we'll be covering. We're going to discuss briefly the state of cybersecurity today. What's going on in the world? You probably see the headlines about major attacks on major companies, and we'll talk about what the lay of the land is. We'll dive a little deeper into a couple of breaches involving companies that you may find to be very similar to yours. And then finally, I'll leave you with some action items, things you can do now to protect yourself and to protect your business. So part one, the state of cybersecurity in business today. From the headlines, you've read about some of these hacks, these data breaches in the last year or so. big one this year was Ashley Madison, which, as you know, was a dating website for married people who wanted to have an affair with somebody else. And the hackers were able to get in there and find the personal information about people who had joined this organization. You know, this particular hack was devastating in many ways to the company, of course, but also to the members of the company. And there are at least 2 suicides that were apparently caused by this hack. People who were having affairs, and this was going to make that affair public, and they apparently committed suicide. So these data breaches can be very powerful. The other one we've heard about this year is Sony Pictures. It seems that some folks in North Korea hacked into Sony Pictures and obtained emails and all sorts of information, possibly over the course of a year. There's some evidence that they were hacking into Sony Pictures for a full year before the information was released. That gave them time to collect a lot of data, but they did more damage than just that. They didn't just steal data; they put some computer coding in there to destroy and delete data as well. So this is a huge problem for Sony Pictures and for their employees. This may have affected as many as 47,000 people. And the next one, this one is kind of funny. It's a word that was created to refer to the stealing of nude photos of celebrities. It's called the fappening, and I guess it started in 2014 and continued into 2015. It's just kind of a funny word, but not so funny for these celebrities who found their very private information out on the internet. Apparently, this was done through iCloud. I'm not sure they know exactly how it was done. I saw one report that it was just done through brute force and guessing at passwords and usernames and that kind of thing. Maybe the case. Now, this one was very interesting. Jeep Cherokee and other Chrysler vehicles, apparently, the hackers can access the vehicle computers through a cellular connection to their entertainment system. And if you haven't seen this, Google this. Google Jeep Cherokee data breach, and you'll find a video that somebody made demonstrating what the hackers were able to do. It's pretty terrifying. The guinea pig, the guy who volunteered to do it, was driving down the highway, and they shut the car down. He slowed to 3 miles per hour, and no matter what he could try to do, he couldn't go any faster. They turned on the radio at full blast. He couldn't do anything. It's, again, you know, I started off saying that my cases all involve very smart people, and that's the case here. Very clever people who know how to exploit weaknesses in a system. Anthem is an insurance company. Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. This is a medical insurance company here in the United States, and this particular hack was very damaging and very destructive, and a great example of how devastating this kind of hack can be. To get into the Anthem system, they had to trick some very high-level people with some credentials with high-level IT access. And they were able to trick them into letting them in, basically through some sort of phishing scheme. And this is the weakness in any technology. It's the human element. This is where the con artists come in. They use some kind of confidence game to trick the employees into giving up that data or giving access in it, as with typical phishing schemes. This one, you know, this one was huge. This affected 80 million people. 80 million people had their medical data accessed and stolen. And as we'll come to a little bit later, I'll explain to you why medical data is particularly valuable on the black market for stolen data. This is an interesting website, Hackmageddon. Hackmageddon tracks the data breaches, known data breaches, around the world. And even excluding the unknown data breaches, the number of data breaches that are known is astonishing. And we have an average of 70 to 80 known breaches per month. That's 935 per year in this 12-month period that I surveyed here. Now, by the way, you'll notice here, hopefully you have taken out one of the handouts, which is this PowerPoint presentation that I'm giving to you today. From your handout, I've deleted some of the words. These are blank spaces for you to fill in. It's easy to find the answers. They're right on the screen in front of you. So here, for example, on this page, you need to fill in 935 pages onto your sheet of notes. I was a college professor for a while. This is how college professors keep their students engaged, by forcing them to actually interact a little bit. So my apologies to people who thought they left college behind them, and I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of work today. It's easy work. You just have to fill in the blanks on your handout. Okay, so let's see. Hackmageddon tracks the breaches. Oh, that's right. So just for a 3-month period, consider some of the banks, some of the companies that were hacked into. I surveyed third quarter of 2014. There was a bank called Total Bank. It's a hotel we'll talk about a little bit later, the Houstonian Hotel. PharmaNet, 1,600 people had their health data breached. The NASDAQ was breached into. A company called mycause.com.au. It's an Australian charity. Lasco, a metal products company. That one was particularly bad for the consumer because that company apparently waited 3 years to make any kind of report of the data breach. Bitcoin was hacked. USIS, a U.S. defense contractor, was hacked. Vibram. I don't know if you've seen over the last decade these shoes, these rubber shoes that have all 5 toes. Vibram makes those. They were hacked. An online pharmacy, health food store was hacked called thenaturalonline.com. Another health system, 4.5 million medical records were compromised. UPS was hacked. A pizza joint in Portland, Oregon, Auto Pizza. Dairy Queen, and of course the fappening we've already talked about. Home Depot, that was 56 million customers affected. A hotel called Bartell Hotels. California State University. A women's clothing website called Yandy.com. Japan Airlines, and a high school in Grady High School in Atlanta, Georgia. So it really covers the spectrum, and I didn't even list the government hacks, the hacking into government websites. These are the businesses, the private businesses, who are now suffering the effects of cyber Ebola. As I said, I mean, I chuckle, but it's really not funny to the businesses. It can be devastating. All right, so the effect on the breached companies. Let's talk about how it impacts them. Well, last year, IBM hired a group of very smart people at an institute called Ponemon Institute. They do research into all sorts of cyber-related matters. And they surveyed 350 companies worldwide that had suffered data breaches to find out the impact on those companies. They set aside what I'll call mega breaches. They didn't include those in their data. For example, Target was breached about a year ago, and I think what I read, the estimate is about $148 million it has cost the company so far. So setting aside the mega breaches, the average cost for these companies to repair the situation, to get past it, was $3.8 million, $3,800,000, or an average of $154 per stolen record. So if 10,000 records are stolen, that's $1.5 million right there off the top. That can hurt a lot of companies. Exception healthcare, because the cost of healthcare record averaged $363 to fix the situation. So why are medical records so valuable? Well, these records are sold on the black market in the deep web, and they fetch, depending on what the data is, they fetch different prices. Well, medical records are valuable for a few reasons. One, they tend to be easy to get, because unfortunately many hospitals still use old software that is easy for the hackers to get into. But also it's used for very profitable criminal enterprises. What they use it for is they can use your or stolen medical data to buy equipment and to resell the equipment, or they can use it to file false claims in our medical system here in the United States. And the other thing is these medical records have a very long shelf life, so to speak. You know, if somebody steals your credit card data, you just get a new credit card. You might have it the very next day. They might charge something at Walmart. They might buy something for a few $100s, and the next day you can already have a new credit card. Not the case with your medical data. Part of your medical data is your Social Security number or your medical records number. And these are things that you can't change very easily. In fact, it's very difficult, extremely difficult to change a Social Security number. So this is a compromise of your personal information or your clients or your customers' personal information that can haunt them for a lifetime. I thought it was interesting. One executive at a medical group in Utah said that his company is fighting off thousands of attempts per week to hack into their patients' medical data. The sheer number of attacks shows how valuable this information is on the black market. People who sell things on the black market, they go to great lengths to steal it. So some of the direct costs of the breach: investigating the cause. If you don't have an in-house IT department, those people have to be hired. Some forensic IT specialists may need to be hired. Specialists may need to be hired to fix the breach, to repair the situation. If it involves some hardware, the hardware may need to be replaced. New software may need to be purchased and installed. Customers will panic, and they'll need somebody to call. And to maintain that communication with your customers, you'll need a set of hotlines that they can call. And to typically provide free credit monitoring for them. Most companies will provide the free credit monitoring for a year, so that customers can see if their identities have been used. And of course, legal costs. As we'll see shortly, many of these breaches result in lawsuits. And as you know, indirect costs. This is the goodwill of your company, that intangible asset. Loss of business because the customers are afraid to use your business because they're afraid of having their identifying information, personally identifiable information, stolen. Loss of reputation and customer loyalty, and then the marketing expenses you will have to expenditures you'll have to use to redevelop goodwill. These are some of the indirect costs. All right, let's talk about two case studies about two companies that have been affected by this. The first one I'd like to talk about is the Houstonian Hotel. I mentioned that a little bit ago. It's a hotel in Houston, Texas. that has been around for about 3 decades. It's a luxury hotel. One of our presidents stayed there regularly during the 1980s, used it as his residence for voting purposes. I thought it was kind of funny. It was this hotel is marketed as a destination for business executives trying to shed pounds and rediscover their inner velociraptor. Velociraptor is, of course, an extinct dinosaur. But I guess the velociraptor can be rediscovered in Houston, Texas. This breach lasted 6 months. For 6 months, the point of sale devices, the credit card machines at the cash registers were compromised. For 6 months, the hackers were stealing the credit card data of, let's say, very successful business executives who stay at the Houstonian. It was never detected by the hotel itself. They didn't have the systems in place to detect the breach. And they didn't find out until the United States Secret Service notified them. Did you fill in your blanks on that page? On your notes? Obviously, the most important impact was the customers were very angry about the delayed notice. Not only did it take them 6 months to find it, but then once they found out about the breach, they didn't tell their customers right away. And just reading between the lines in the articles I read about this, it sounds like they just didn't have a plan in place. So they had to develop their plan sort of on the fly. What are we going to do? What do we tell our customers? When do we tell them? These kinds of things should have been thought through ahead of time, but they weren't. They suffered some pretty serious direct costs. They had to hire forensic investigators. They had to get a brand new point of sale system, credit monitoring. There's no lawsuit yet. So far, they're crossing their fingers, I'm sure, that it doesn't happen. But with 10,000 customers impacted, you can be sure there are attorneys out there looking at this case to see if they can build a class action lawsuit. You know, if we go by the average cost of these breaches, this one at a minimum costs $1.5 million for the Houstonian. I'm sure they didn't have that amount of cash set aside in their budget to handle this. Marketing, rebuilding trust, rebuilding brand loyalty. They're going to have to do that. So what are the lessons? The Chief Information Officer or the Chief Information Security Officer must develop a strategy to detect data breaches. They never detected it here. They had to wait for the government to discover it and let them know. Many companies don't have a Chief Information Security Officer, but you know, in this day and age, it's probably the right thing to do. Have somebody who is focused on information security today in this world with cyber Ebola running loose around the world. And then you need to they needed to give notice to affected customers as soon as possible. Now, there might be reasons for delaying it. There might be a criminal investigation underway. You don't want to tip off the bad guys. That wasn't the case here. Maybe they wanted to develop a strategy. Well, I think that was the case here, but they took too long. It gave their customers time to sort of get angry that they weren't notified in time. They should have anticipated the breach and planned for it. Okay, PNI Digital Media. This was a company founded about 30 years ago, and they operate online photo websites. They are a third-party vendor for other companies. They also operate sort of in-store photo kiosks. You can walk into a Walmart in Canada or a Sam's Club, CVS, and plug your thumb drive into a system and print out some photos. But what was breached here, what's at issue here, are the online photo websites that this company operated for those other companies, some major brands, Walmart, Sam's Club, CVS, Costco, and Rite Aid. And interestingly, this PNI Digital has been owned by Staples for the last couple of years. So, as I mentioned, this was a third-party vendor breach. These were customers of those other companies, of CVS, of Costco, who were affected by this breach. Those customers were angry at Costco, at the big names. They don't know who PNI Media is. So some of the things that were some of the information that was stolen: names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, credit card information, and passwords. The breach window, that's the period of time during which the breach took place. The breach window was 2 months or less, July and August 2015. Not so bad compared to the Houstonian, which had a 6-month breach window. Or Sony Pictures, which may have had a 12-month breach window. The number of customers affected is unknown. So what's the direct impact to PNI Media? Well, I guess it wouldn't be surprising if they lose all of their major clients. This information security, given what they were doing, taking credit cards, people's information to process pictures, information security, data security should have been a #1 priority of PNI Media. And I'm sure these major companies are looking for other vendors who can do this job and do it better. But there are some other costs, because there's a class action lawsuit. PNI Media has been sued in Georgia, I believe, by at least one customer who has filed a class action lawsuit. As many of you may know, a class action lawsuit is when there's many potential victims, and the courts allow them to all be bundled together, and they need to have at least one known plaintiff, one known victim who sort of represents the whole class. The judges will evaluate whether the potential victims are all similar enough to be bunched together like this. But this is very typical in a data breach situation for there to be a class action lawsuit. And they will typically, almost all of them will end with a settlement, because the risk of trial is so great. The worst case scenario after trial is so great that most companies will decide to settle the case. And the minimum for this type of class action is going to be in 6 figures, in the hundreds of thousands of U.S. dollars, but more likely in the millions of dollars, as we'll see shortly. Plus attorney's fees. PNI won't just have to pay out to the plaintiffs in this class action lawsuit. They also have to pay their own attorneys. And a class action lawsuit like this can itself cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees to defend it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars just to defend it, and not even get to trial. So with all that combined, even a weak class action will probably end up costing a company that is sued around $1 million. All right, so what did we learn from the PNI Media data breach? Well, a few things. If you use the services of a third-party vendor, you've got to do your cyber due diligence on them too. It's not enough to know that your own company protects the data of its customers. You've got to know that the companies you do business with that have access to your customers' data also have the same standards that you have, that you want for your customers. In this case, we know that Staples just acquired PNI Media a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Just purchased them. Did they do their due diligence, their cyber due diligence on the data security strategies of PNI Media? We don't know. We don't know, but somehow that was an important thing that they needed to do before acquiring this property, this company. I mean, another one that's been in the news recently is T-Mobile. T-Mobile's customers had their data breached through a third-party vendor, another large corporation, international corporation, Experian. I guess Experian has in the past had very strong data security procedures, but recently went on a process of acquiring a number of companies, purchasing a number of companies, and it looks like they may not have done thorough enough data security analysis on at least one of the companies they purchased, and that's how, through that that company that Experian purchased, T-Mobile's customers had their data breached, and now T-Mobile is having to deal with this. You know, I was asked recently, you know, can I sue T-Mobile? T-Mobile is going to have to deal with this, and it was two parties removed from them. Even if T-Mobile had the greatest internal security strategies, because of their business partners, their customers were breached. Now, number 3 here, this is a very important lesson. It's not enough to stop the breach, because damage has been done. Damage to the goodwill your company has in the business world. Damage that in the form of a lawsuit, perhaps. So that it's not enough to be able to handle this process technologically. There's a bigger picture here. A bigger plan, a bigger strategy is necessary. Business continuity. Business continuity. The executives in your company, it might be you, might be people in your chain of command, whoever it is, they need to be thinking about how they will survive, how the company will survive this type of breach, because as we've talked about, it's very expensive. There are some strategies to survive the breach. Well, that's a good question. Will P&I survive? Wouldn't be a surprise if they lose all of these major contracts with these major companies, and they're going to have to spend a lot of money on this class action lawsuit. So they're going to take a huge hit, if nothing else. Here's a few examples of some recent settlements. Stanford University had medical records breached, 20,000 medical records roughly, and that ended up costing them $4.1 million. That's the fund set up for the customers, the patients whose medical records were breached. Schnucks, a grocery store, $2.1 million. Vendini, a online ticketing system. They're sort of a third-party vendor for other companies that need to sell tickets. $3 million. Sony's PlayStation system was breached. 77 million customers were impacted. It cost them $5 million. Sony Pictures just settled its class action lawsuit for an $8 million fund. And Target, this was the big one. They settled for $67 million. This isn't cheap. This isn't cheap, and that's why in the insurance industry, a growing product is cyber insurance, which we'll talk about in just a little while. This is the P&I Digital lawsuit in Georgia. And I want to dive into it a little deeper just so you understand sort of the legal issues that are involved when a company gets sued, and how to prepare. Understanding them will help you prepare for them. A cause of action. When you sue somebody, you sue them for a cause of action. This is a set of facts that justify the right to sue. You know, so what people are most familiar with is in the criminal world, a cause of action might be murder. So what are the facts that make this a murder? Or burglary or robbery? What are the facts that justify those causes of action? Well, in a civil lawsuit, there are other types of cause of action. One is negligence, breach of implied contract, breach of contract, bailment. In every case, there will be some statutes that were allegedly violated, statutes about privacy. They might allege unjust enrichment. When a lawyer is filing a lawsuit, they go through the list of potential cause of action and allege all that apply, all that they believe might apply. And then, if this were to go to a jury or a trial of some sort, then the jury would have the option of deciding which, if any, of those causes of action are the applicable cause of action of these facts. So we're going to talk for a moment about negligence because this is sort of the core of a lawsuit in a data breach, the core cause of action. And understanding this will help you plan for your company's cyber future. Negligence requires a duty to act or not to act, to do something or refrain from doing something. And some of the duties that are alleged in these lawsuits are duty to exercise reasonable care in safeguarding or protecting information, duty to design, maintain, and test security systems and take other reasonable security measures to secure personal information. Notice the common thread there is reasonable. The law doesn't expect you to go to extraordinary lengths, merely reasonable lengths. However, the more secure your system is, the less likely a judge or jury would find your actions to be unreasonable. So it's a, shall we say, you want to over-design your system, make it stronger than absolutely necessary just to ensure safety. Duty to implement process to detect breaches, and duty to make timely disclosure of the breach. So you can see there will be a weighing of the facts. A jury or a judge would have to just determine whether or not the actions were reasonable, whether a disclosure was timely. It doesn't say 30 days to disclose. It doesn't say 15 days. It doesn't say 45 days. It says timely. And that will be different in each situation. I like this graphic over to the right here, though. It really sort of explains where negligence falls. And you see good practices, best practices, all the way over to the right. You definitely want to err on the side of caution. So where do these duties come from? When we talk about your duties to your customers, duties to your employees, because it can be employee data as well, duty to whoever's information your company has in its possession. Well, there are a number of sources of the duty. In the United States and in the United Kingdom, we have something called common law. This is law made up by judges. Judges look towards statutes to find out what applies. If there's no statutes, then they look towards decisions that are made by judges in the past. And so these judges' decisions evolve over the decades, and that's called common law. That's the body of law that we call common law. Common law requires reasonable care. That was the duty we saw on the previous page, the duty of reasonable care. And what does that mean? It's the degree of caution that an ordinarily prudent and rational person would use. Well, okay, so what does that mean? Again, it's going to be weighing factors. The jury or the judge will weigh certain factors to decide what would an ordinarily prudent person and rational person do in this situation. And you know what they're going to look at? They're going to look at the industry. They're going to look at the industry and find out what your industry is doing to protect data, see if you are acting reasonably in that context. They'll look to see what other breaches have happened in your industry and whether you should have known that that this type of breach was likely or possible or whatnot. They're going to look at what an ordinarily prudent and rational person would do. ordinarily prudent and rational company. Consider, for example, the likelihood of a breach. How foreseeable is it? Is a breach inevitable in your business? I mean, we know if you're in the medical business, if you're a hospital or some other medical service provider, you know there are hackers out there trying to get your information. We know they're trying. How secure is your system? So is it foreseeable that there will be a breach? How foreseeable is the severity of the harm? How much damage will a breach do to you, your employees, and your customers? And then what is the burden for taking the steps necessary to prevent the breach? And I do want to add here, I'm sorry for that delay there for a moment. I just saw my notes here. I want to add that when you're developing the plan, and we'll talk about developing that plan later, you really do want to consider the likelihood of breach and the potential severity of the harm. Think about those things when you're developing your plan. The more data you possess belonging to somebody else, the more data you have like that, the more likely you'll be breached, like we talked about the hospital system, right? Okay. Oh, so we talked about common law. Some other sources of duties, as I said, are statutes. So P&I was sued in Georgia. So one of the causes of action is the Georgia privacy statute. So when you're reviewing the world your company lives in, you got to consider where you do business. If you're headquartered in, say, I don't know, California, but you do business in Arizona or Georgia or Texas, whatnot, you may get sued there. See, you need to do an evaluation of the privacy statutes, the privacy requirements in that state. Sony, for example, was sued here in California, under California statutes and also Virginia privacy statutes. There are U.S. laws. There are dozens of U.S. laws. Actually, each state probably has dozens of laws. I'm a California attorney. I know that here in California, there must be 4 or 5 dozen laws pertaining to privacy from every different angle. For decades now, every new state legislator has taken it upon him or herself to create some new law. So there are literally, I'm just picturing them in my head, there's probably 5 dozen laws pertaining to privacy and this kind of data security. Some of them are very small, cover very small little issues, but some of them are comprehensive. So you'll need to do a survey, and we'll talk about that. You'll need to do a survey of the laws that apply to you. The federal government in the United States has quite a few laws that apply. A couple of the big ones are the law dealing with medical records called HIPAA, H-I-P-A-A, and then the one dealing with children's data. So this is particularly important if you have a website that collects data about children. There are specific guidelines for that situation, and there are international agreements. A good one, a big one, is the U.S.-EU safe harbor frameworks, and frankly, it's a great guideline. The Europeans set such high standards for privacy and for data security that if you were to follow these guidelines, you'd be doing pretty well. Your company's taking really great steps in the right direction. And one of the things it requires is that the company be recertified every year, which forces them to reevaluate their data security strategies annually. It's just a process that makes sure that they are taking the steps necessary to protect the data. So take a look at the U.S.-EU safe harbor frameworks. That's right. I wanted to talk to you just about some of the allegations of negligence from these lawsuits. And you can see how this would happen, and it could happen in a company. Failure to develop and implement adequate security protections. Sounds like, for example, the Houstonian and Hotel and P&I Media may not have done that. That they didn't yet realize about cyber Ebola that is loose around the world. That hackers are out there who operate in the black market, hacking everywhere they can, and now those two companies are paying the consequences for not taking the proper steps to develop adequate security protections. In some situations, executives have received recommendations from employees and consultants about how to protect the data, and they don't take those steps. There are some allegations that that's what happened with Experian, that they knew better, that they had people who were telling them to do the cyber due diligence on the companies they're acquiring, and they didn't, because they were on they had a policy of acquiring companies. That may or may not be true, but it looks like that may have been what happened there. Misleading customers about level of security, well, that's always the wrong thing to do. Misleading customers about anything is the wrong thing to do. That would be fraud. It wouldn't just be a cybersecurity danger. It could lead to all sorts of other lawsuits for misleading consumers. Not having or not following your cybersecurity protocol. So if you don't have a plan, or you have a plan and you don't follow it, that's a problem. Executives and members of the board of directors need to stay informed about these issues, and if they're not, that can be alleged as a source of negligence. Now, it'll be interesting to see if these allegations played out, how they play out in front of a jury. But frankly, as I mentioned earlier, it's such a risk to go to trial in a case like this. The downside, the amount of potential damages is so great. Virtually all of these cases will settle eventually. Taking too long to give notice to customers about a breach. Okay, what that does is, if it takes too long, that prevents them from taking the steps they need to protect their information, which then causes them more damage, which then, of course, is thrown right back on the company who let it happen. All right, moving on to part 3, action items. Let's see how much more time we have here. Okay, we'll wrap this up in the next 10, 12 minutes. What is the information you have to protect? Well, the legal term that's used in most statutes is personally identifiable information, or PII for short. This is information that is directly attributable to a particular person. So, for example, one statute, and all the statutes define it a little bit differently, and some statutes have a comprehensive list of every possible data point that is a PII. But for one example, a statute defines it as the first name or first initial plus the last name and any one of the following: a social security number, a date of birth, financial numbers, or medical record numbers. The list went on, but this is an example of how they're thinking. But just think about all the data your company collects about its employees or about its customers, and if that's attributable to a particular person, that could cause, in a way that could cause damage to them because their identity is stolen. That's what PII is. But again, this is another thing that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Your attorney can help you figure that out. What is the data you need to be protecting? Both where you're headquartered, but also in the other locations where you do business, and could get sued if there's a data breach. All right, so step 1. If you've done nothing at all, if you've never thought about cybersecurity before, or haven't in a while, if you haven't thought about this in 10 years, you need to do it again. If you haven't thought about it in 5 years, you need to do it again. Like I said, with the U.S.-EU Safe Harbor Framework, they have to do it every year to certify themselves as compliant. That's a great idea. Obviously, in business, there's always a cash issue. Do you have the cash to do this? But this, if I can make no other point today, you remember nothing else, this has got to be a priority. It can't be something on the back burner forever. You've got to work it into your budget. So step number one, survey your employees. Ask them a number of different things. So you want to find out what is the data universe you're dealing with, data landscape in your company. What kind of data do you collect? And this has got to go out to all the different departments, because there's going to be data collected that you didn't think about. Oh, I didn't realize we did that. Oh, you're kidding me. I didn't know we kept that data. So you got to get this information from employees, customers, vendors, etc. And how is that data used? How do you use that data? This is just background. You need to know what you're dealing with first. I mean, you might decide you don't need to collect some of that data anymore, which would certainly make security easier. Just get rid of it, right? And of course, legally, you're going to have to follow the right steps to get rid of it as well. What security measures are in place? I'm sure your IT department is thinking about this. I'm sure they are. And even without any direction from you or from other executives, they've probably taken steps to do something. Find out what is already in place. Who has access to the data? Who has access to the data? As I mentioned with the Anthem breach, well, even there, they were able to get access credentials from very high people with very high IT security clearances. So even there, even though they had different layers of security depending on the need to know, even that was defeated. But still, you need to know who has access to the data. What security measures do your competitors, affiliates, and vendors have in place? All right. The questions to ask in this survey are probably infinite. These are a few examples to get you thinking about what kinds of questions you want to ask in your survey. But this is the first step. The second step is to consider the weak points. And this is not step 2. This is still part of step 1. But what are the weak points? Once you know what data you've had, look at where your weak points are. Who has access to the data? Who needs access? And what are you doing to verify the identity of the person who's accessing the data? The more critical the data is, the more sensitive it is, the more levels of security, obviously, you'll need to protect that data. External threats, hackers, without a doubt. Hackers. They're out there. They're hacking every day. Dumpster divers. People might be going through your dumpsters to see what's thrown out. And third parties, I've made this point a couple of times, vendors and acquired companies. You need to know, are there any weaknesses there? All right, this is step 2. Survey the law. We've already gone over this a little bit, but there are a lot of laws out there that apply to data security. And you need to know what applies to you. I mean, if you're in the medical industry, medical record statutes. If you're in the financial industry, financial privacy laws, privacy of children, consumer privacy laws. California actually has a very comprehensive consumer privacy law. Does your jurisdiction? You need to know. Other statutes in your state or your country, and then, of course, the international agreements. The key question to ask is, what requirements or duties or obligations do these statutes impose on your company? These duties can affect you before the breach. Do you have to notify your consumers about your privacy policy? And they can affect you after the breach. You need to know, you need to have an understanding of the laws that affect you. As I said, there are, in my jurisdiction, California, there are probably 5 dozen statutes that could possibly apply to your company. Step 3. This is the big one. This is where you get down and dig in and start to create your your policies, okay? What do you need to do before the breach? Do the statutes require you to provide notice of privacy protections? Do you have the multi-layered strategy necessary, allowing only employees who need access to have access and to verify that it is that employee who's accessing the data? And have they been thoroughly trained to make sure that they protect that data? Do you have systems in place to detect data breaches? I mentioned that medical group in Utah. They're being hacked. Hackers are trying to get in 1,000 times a week. They have to be on their toes to make sure that the hackers never get through. And cyber insurance. Now, this is important. Take a look first at your commercial general liability policy because it might cover a data breach. More and more policies are making an exclusion for this because these data breaches are expensive, and they want you to buy a separate policy for data breaches. But your commercial general policy might still have coverage for a data breach. Take a look. What if it doesn't? Cyber insurance is a great way to ensure business continuity, meaning your business survives a data breach. Preparing for the breach. What steps do you need to take to do that? Well, you need to have a response manual. You have an employee manual, an employee policies manual, right? You need to have a data breach response manual. Who's in charge when a data breach happens? Who communicates to whom? Who needs to know what's going on? Who's giving the orders? What about document? You need to, when you have a data breach, you need to have a policy for documenting everything that happens. How was it discovered? What have you learned about it? What steps have you taken to correct the situation, to stop the breach from happening, to prevent it from happening, continuing to happen, and to notify your consumers? You might consider having a relationship with law enforcement ahead of time, especially if you're particularly vulnerable. If you are in a business where the hackers really want your data, you may want to have a relationship already in place with law enforcement where they can come in and try to catch the people who've done it. And you need to plan for giving notice. How soon are you going to give notice? You know, from a liability perspective, you generally want to give notice as soon as possible, but you have to consider what are the criteria that will help you make that decision when it's time to give notice. So, as we wrap this up, I just want you to consider 3 important points. I call it cyber Ebola because it's extremely dangerous and it's almost inevitable in today's business world. These hackers on the black market out there are trying to steal data every day, 24 hours a day, from wherever they're sitting in the world, on their sofa, with a laptop on their knees. They're trying to hack into businesses' data. And the cost, as we've seen, can be devastating. But preparing ahead of time is critical. Now, a small business, cash is always an issue. If you've got a new startup that you're working on, if you're an entrepreneur with a new startup, you're always concerned about the cash coming in. But this needs to be a priority, keeping it on your mind. If you're developing a new system, putting these strategies in place ahead of time can help you reduce the likelihood and severity of a breach. So building this architecture, this framework, this security, the cybersecurity structure into your system at the beginning is going to help you down the road. It will reduce your liability, and most importantly, it will help ensure that your company continues to exist after a data breach. I want to thank you all for attending my presentation today. I don't mean to scare you, or I don't want to scare you, but I guess I do mean to scare you because this is important. This is the reality, and it's got to be a consideration in all entrepreneurial ventures, in all size businesses, in any part of the world. It's got to be part of the discussion from the beginning. So I wish you luck in all of your endeavors. Take care.